And now, allow me to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lisa Fast. Lisa brings tremendous knowledge and insight from starting, owning, and operating her own pharmacy in California. As a successful pharmacy owner, Lisa was a PDS member for many years and received many accolades, such as making the Inc. 500 list, Entrepreneur of the Year, and authoring several articles. After selling her primary location and joining the PDS team, she has spearheaded the compounding curriculum and several key programs. Lisa now leads the business development team, oversees all new services and partnerships at PDS, and is PDS's resident profit guru for its members. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Tracy. How's my audio? Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to be talking about how you can increase and diversify your non-PBM revenue. This is an area that's become a very big passion of mine over this past year, as we know that the PBMs have been changing some of the rules, and so I want to help you break free from the limitations of the PBMs, take back control of your revenue, and we're going to do that all by talking about some critical KPIs or key performance indicators. So one of the largest problems that I see in our industry is the fact that pharmacists have been devalued. And what I mean by that is we are only paid because of the products that we're dispensing. You know, if you think about it logically, and I'm sure many of you have, is the fact that we can get paid, you know, $5 for drug A in a bottle, $50 for drug B in a bottle, or $500 for drug C in the bottle, but yet we're still doing the same service for all of those different drugs is really just completely illogical. We as a professional have been devalued in that dispensing model because it's only based on the product. You know, when you went to school to become a healthcare professional, to help your patients, and not just be a reseller of drugs, which is kind of how we've been pigeonholed with the way that our payment models are. And the big elephant in the room is that we have to play these games because we're at the complete mercy of the PBMs. It's their rules, it's their unfair practices, their abuses, their need for profit, and it's really them that are devaluing our services and our value, which is why I'd like to help you break free. Not completely, we're not going to be able to get rid of them unless you go really extreme, but at least to break free some of your revenue away from the PBM. Now, typically, the reason that the PBM's rules and changes and low profit margins hurt us is because if you're like me and a typical pharmacy owner, greater than 90% of your revenue flows through a PBM. So when they change something, they audit you, it's a significant part of your business. It's not just affecting 5 or 10%, it's a big portion because we all know that the big 3 PBMs control most of the market. So when one of the big 3 change something for across the whole industry, it's impacting all of us independent pharmacies very, very significantly. And so what I'd really like to help us is to try to get this number to be as low as possible. If we can even reduce this number by 5, 10, or 15 percentage points, it's going to make a huge impact to not only us being able to sleep at night, but to your bottom line and to the security of your business. So right now we are having to deal with low margins, and that's because the PBMs keep coming up with new rules, new equations, whether it's DIR fees, GER, BER, audits, all different kinds of things that really just make it completely unclear of exactly what we're going to get paid. The smoke and mirror games have just reached a whole new level over these last 12 to 24 months. You no longer have any idea what you're actually going to get paid, no matter what adjudicates at the point of sale. And so that leads to a lot of uncertainty in your revenue. You're not sure if you can make those decisions to maybe invest in your store, maybe buy some equipment, or invest in your marketing or in your team, because you just have that uncertainty. And because of the PBMs controlling such a large portion of our revenue, we have a high risk for clawbacks, audits, and we're subject to all of their predatory practices. And all of these things just continue to devalue the pharmacists that you know, I know if you guys are keeping up in some of the news, how there's, you know, some doctors that are ranting and raving to some of the national news that telling a diagnosis code to a pharmacist is violating HIPAA. And, you know, obviously we all know that nothing can be further from the truth. But this story that the PBMs are spinning, that we're just putting pills in a bottle, has really continued to devalue us as professionals, not just from our business standpoint, but from our professional standing as well. And so all of this leads to a feeling of just being out of control and feeling like you don't have the ability to impact your business like you would want to. I've often been told that they feel like you're in a no-win scenario. So I want to help you to see that there is some different ways to be looking at this. And this is where I think the importance of diversification comes in. If 90% plus of your revenue is flowing from a PBM, then you're on very shaky ground. And don't be alarmed or don't feel like you're out of place. The average pharmacy, that's completely the normal way of doing business. So what we're going to try and help you to do is to not be normal, to be a little abnormal and go in some other ways. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can diversify your revenue. You want to move away from PBMs, which is typically very low revenue. And when you grow your revenue sources from outside of the PBMs, it generally leads to better profitability. Even if it's something as simple as growing your OTC sales, your margin on OTC sales tends to be about 50%, which is significantly higher than we're all receiving from the PBMs. So even small little changes can make a big difference. Now, if you start increasing your service-based pharmacy revenue, which is your professional services from medical plans, you can actually greatly impact your bottom line from that increase of revenue. Doing so and billing for your professional services will elevate your pharmacists, not only for the stature of really what they went to school for and really what their licenses give them the authority to do, but at you as the pharmacy owner, it also creates a whole new revenue stream that is completely outside of the influence of PBMs. Now let's get into the KPIs. I am one of those admittedly nerdy number people. I love numbers, and I just been very comfortable with numbers. And so we're going to be talking about some KPIs. And KPI just stands for Key Performance Indicator, basically an important metric that you should be tracking. And you know, we teach pharmacy owners to be tracking many KPIs here at PDS when we work with pharmacies. But I'm going to narrow it down for you very specifically for the KPIs that you should be tracking for the diversification of your revenue. So we're going to talk very deeply about 4 KPIs today: your service mix, your professional encounters, your total gross margin, and your net profit. Now, obviously, things outside of diversification impact some of those, but I'm going to help try to weave a little story on why, if you're trying to diversify and maybe get out from underneath the thumb of the PBMs, why these are the 4 KPIs that I think you should be tracking. Before we get into the KPIs, I want to talk a little bit about lead measures versus lag measures. Now, you might be thinking, I'm speaking German. Yeah, I've never heard these terms before, but we all live with them, and we all intuitively know them, even if you don't know them by these names. And so I want to go through a little bit to help you to understand, because I know not all pharmacists are nerds like me and like numbers. So I want you to understand a little bit of context of numbers to be able to understand the relationship to one another. So a lead measure is the highest leverageable action or activities that can accomplish a goal. You're like, all right, thanks, Lisa. That doesn't really help me to understand. So let me bullet it down for you. It's basically the critical activities that drive the results that we are looking for. It's a predictive measurement, helps you to predict the outcome when you do those things. Another way of looking at it is an activity that you think will be effective for achieving your goal. One of the best, hold on just a minute there, got something in my throat. One of the best examples of a lead measure that pretty much every human can relate to is dieting. So your lead measures for dieting might be how many calories you eat in a day, how many times you go to the gym, and those are lead measures because you do them before the outcome happens. You don't know what the outcome will be of tracking your calories or going to the gym. We predict that it will be a loss in weight or a loss in fat, but that's why you're doing them, is because you think that they will give you the outcome that you're looking for. So that's what a lead measure is. Now, a lag measure is pretty much the exact opposite. It's tracking the success of your wildly important goal. It's kind of after the fact. So it's your achieved results, the outcome of your work that you resulted in, the goal that you're trying to achieve. And so when you're looking at data, it's really important that you understand the relationship of the data and know whether it's a lead measure or a lag measure. And a specific number or a specific data point can actually be both. And so, for example, going back to the weight loss example, maybe you're using something like your gym, and that's calories burned. So the gym can be a lead measure for that, and it also could be a lag measure for your activity level, your activity, or how many days you accomplished your goal. And so you can be one of both, and we're going to get into that in some of the KPIs that we're going to be talking about today. I'll show you how they can both be a lead measure and a lag measure. And so when you're using lag measure, when you're only looking at results and you're using them without lead measures, it's dangerous. That's what the data analytics people use it as, is it's dangerous. And that's because you have no idea what produced those lag measures. You end up making a bunch of stories up instead of using the factual data. So the first KPI that we're going to be talking about is professional encounters. Now, professional encounters, the way that I identify this, is the number of encounters that you or your pharmacist or other providers that you have under your umbrella, what are the number of encounters that they have with patients that could result in a billing opportunity. Now, some of you may not be billing for these professional encounters, but I want you to be able to start tracking these KPIs. So even if it could result in a billing opportunity, those are the professional encounters that we are looking for. Now, in order to bill for an encounter, you have to be able to generate a SOAP note or another type of care plan. And so many of you are getting more clinical. You're looking for those other types of opportunities. You might be working with a local employer or something that you're doing some outcomes. And so that's how you know if an encounter is billable, so whether or not you count for it. So if you answer a patient's question in 30 seconds or less, and that's all of your encounter, that's really not a billable opportunity. Even though you could say it was a professional encounter, you certainly gave professional advice, but a professional encounter has to meet a minimum threshold. And so you really want to be thinking about, could I generate a SOAP note, or could I generate a care plan from that interaction? And that's what's going to be the minimum to be able to count that. So some examples of professional encounters. Now, these are just a small list, not to be all inclusive. If you give immunization, if you give a consult for a patient, if you teach an educational class, if you dispense a DME product or an MTM or a medication reconciliation, if you're a long-term care pharmacist and you do chart reviews, all of those types of things are very typical normal encounters that pharmacists are doing each and every day. Now, typically when you're talking about your service-based pharmacy revenue, your revenue that you make from these professional encounters, it's a much higher margin revenue. When you're talking PBMs, we're lucky to scrape out, a few percentage points, it seems these days. And that's because you have cost of goods sold. You have the cost of the drug. And typically, revenue from a professional encounter standpoint is typically about 80% margin. And that's because you don't really have a cost of goods. Your cost is your person or yourself, which you're already paying payroll for and you're already there. If you do an immunization or something, there might be a cost of goods sold. But a lot of the encounters are just your cognitive, your expertise, your knowledge, and your time. And so therefore, there isn't the typical cost of goods. And so your professional encounters margin is much higher. Now, professional encounters is a lead measure, going back to our lead and lag measures, because we think if you have more professional encounters with your patients, you'll be able to create more billable opportunities that will increase your revenue and profits. So it's a lead measure. We don't know that it in fact will do that, but that's what we're kind of assuming, that predictive measurement. So professional encounters is a lead measure. Now, if you're writing down any of the goals that you want to achieve, I usually recommend, if you're just starting out, if you're not a heavy clinical type of place yet, start out with the goal of just one encounter per day. And that's per pharmacist or other provider. And you might say like, well, what other providers? Some pharmacists and pharmacies employ a respiratory therapist, or they might employ an RN or something like that. So you want to look for one billable encounter each and every day. And your goal, if you want to maximize your revenue potential, you want to aim for about 5 a day in order to maximize your revenue potential. Focus on the things you're already doing for your patients. I actually was reading on a Facebook group post that, you know, one of their patients called them again, and they call them all the time, and next thing you know, they spent 45 minutes on the phone with this patient. That's a billable encounter. You can certainly create a very probably deep care plan or SOAP note from that encounter. So focus on the things you're already doing, and depending on what that is for your pharmacy, if you're a long-term care pharmacy, if you're a retail pharmacy or compounding pharmacy, you're probably already doing some of these things every day. You don't really have to change your pharmacy. And then, of course, you can always consider adding new professional services in order to better serve your patients. And typically, the professional encounters are billed to medical plans for networks that you were credentialed with. So going over to service mix. Now, service mix is going to be one of those KPIs that are both a lead and a lag measure. So I define service mix as the percentage of PBM versus non-PBM based revenue for your pharmacy. So typically most pharmacies are around 90, sometimes even 95% of PBM revenue. So that means that they have either 10 or 5% of non-PBM revenue. And generally you can calculate that by you just taking your total amount of revenue from PBMs and divide it by your total revenue for that same time period. And that will give you that percentage that you're looking for. So if you don't know this number for you, I highly recommend when you get off this webinar that you go calculate this for your pharmacy, just so you know where you stand in this. And ideally, a lower number is better because that means less of your revenue is controlled by your PBMs. Generally, overall, that typically means that your pharmacy is going to be more profitable as well. And so the goal for this isn't really to reach a certain number. I know in our professional encounters, I talked about the 1 a day or the 5 a day. This is really about self-improvement. So you need to know where you're starting and then getting that number changed in the direction that you want it to go. And so I've talked to pharmacies that are 50-50. I've talked to pharmacies that are 70-30, and that's okay. They're all great. They're all doing the best of their business that they can. And so really this isn't about comparing to someone else, but rather comparing to yourself. And it is possible. I've talked to several pharmacies that have been able to reduce their PBM-based revenue to be less than 60%, which seems sometimes completely out of reach for us guys that are up in the 90s, but it is achievable, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's a continual focus on diversifying revenue streams. And I usually say set goals in 5% increments. You know, if you're over at 90% now, don't set your first goal at 70% because that's going to take a long time to get to. Set your first goal of achievement of 5% increments, and maybe the easiest things to improve your OTC sales. Maybe bring in CBD or something else like that that can cause an influx of dollars that will shift that percentage. Now, service mix is a lead measure for total gross margin and net profit, because we are assuming, again, predictive measurement, that if we improve our service mix, so if we get more of our revenue from non-PBM resources, that our total gross margin and net profit will go up. And service mix is I just said that, sorry, that was duplicated. Service mix is a lag measure for professional encounters because it is an outcome of professional encounters. Professional encounters leads to more revenue through non-PBM sources, thereby changing your service mix. Alrighty, third KPI, which is a lag measure, gross margin. Now, gross margin dollars are something that many of you probably are looking at in one way, shape, or form of reports. So gross margins have generally been declining for several years, and that really comes due to the pressure of the PBMs on our revenue. And you can calculate your gross margin in terms of total gross margin dollars, or you can calculate it as a percentage of your overall revenue. Now, to take your total gross margin dollars and you divide it by your total revenue, that will get you your gross margin percentage. So for example, if you had total revenue of $1,000 and your margin was $100, then you take $100, divide it by 1,000, and you get 10%. Both versions, calculating both your dollars and calculating your percentage, gives you kind of different insights into your pharmacy's performance. When you want to benchmark yourself against other pharmacies, generally you want to look at the percentage because that normalizes everybody's numbers. But when you want to look at what might be impacting your bottom line more, or how your good ability to have cash flow or pay your bills, you want to look at the dollars. You know, a famous saying from Dan, who was our founder here at PDS, says you can't pay bills in percentage points. You can only pay bills in dollars. So sometimes it's really important to look at the dollar side as well. Now, the goal for this is you want this as high as possible. You know, there's not like an upper limit for what you want to be. So, and for percentage, generally you should be having a percentage of higher than 80% of your total revenue, and the higher is better, of course. And so if you calculate this for yourself and you fall below that 80%, you know, you might need to make some moves in order to get that improved. Now, again, since diversifying revenue successfully should lead to higher gross margins, this is a lag measure from that standpoint. All right, last but not least, our net profit. Net profit is the ultimate lag measure, I say, because that's what we ultimately all care about as business owners, is what is our net take home that I get to keep in my back pocket. And so I look at this as the ultimate lag measure for performance in your performance KPI for your pharmacy. Everything you do, every change you make, whether it's improving your team, shortening your hours, buying better, selling higher, everything that you do will ultimately lead down to this lag measure. So you should always be paying attention to this particular KPI, no matter what your ultimate goal of your business is, because everything leads down to here. This is the ultimate destination. And so everything feeds into this number. And you can track and calculate this number just like the gross margin as either dollars or as a percentage. And they both kind of give you different insights into that. So to calculate the percentage, you take your total net profit dollars and you divide it by your total revenue, and that'll give you a percentage of your revenue that is net profit. Now, service-based pharmacy revenue, or your professional services revenue, has a profound effect on net profits. And I'll take you through a little exercise to show you. So a typical pharmacy without service-based pharmacy revenue. Total revenue is $4 million. Total margin is $800,000. The net profit is $120,000. And if you were to add $200,000 of retail revenue, so you were to increase that total revenue from 4 million to 4.2 million, so you're now up to 4.2. Now your total margin is $840,000, and your net profit was $126,000. It only increased by $6,000 of net profit by adding $200,000 of your regular revenue. Now, if we flip sides and we start talking about pharmacies with service-based pharmacy revenue. So again, we're starting off the same, 4,800,000 with a net profit of 120,000. Now, if we add $200,000 of service-based pharmacy revenue, this means you're still at a new total revenue of 4.2 million, but now our total margin is 960,000. And you're like, well, Lisa, where do those numbers come from? Well, earlier I talked about your professional encounters revenue being a higher profit margin than your typical revenue because you're not having a cost of goods. There's not a product tied to this revenue. So your margin is typically much higher, typically running about 80%. And so now your net profit is $290,000 or a change of $170,000. And so this is why looking at the total story of your KPIs and understanding how they lead into one another and how they connect to one another can help you make better business decisions for yourself if you understand what that outcome is of all this math. And so I know this was a lot of numbers on the screen, and most of you are probably like, oh my gosh, eyes are glassing over, and you're not a nerd like me, but this kind of stuff gets really exciting when you really understand how to improve your pharmacy metrics. When you understand this relationship, then you know exactly what to focus on of what you need to improve in your pharmacy in order to get the outcomes that you're looking for. So if you're looking for a higher net profit, which is easier to add? Is it easier to add $200,000 of retail revenue to do that because you get a change of 6,000 net profit, or the $200,000 in professional revenue? And so that's something obviously to consider and to talk with whoever you talk about kind of your business decisions with. So that's a brief review of different ways that you can diversify your revenue streams, and in using KPIs to help track that. Now, of course, there's many more KPIs, again, besides just those 4, but I thought that those 4 were the most important if you are trying to diversify your revenue, and kind of track your pharmacy's reliance or lack of reliance on the PBMs as you grow that. I know that the handouts in the GoToWebinar has the slides for this. It also has the CE information. And if you would like to download some other information that I created specifically for AAP pharmacies, you can go to pharmacyowners.com/AAP-SBP, and you can download some more information there that will be a supplement to this session. All right, so I didn't see any questions during the presentation, but Tracy, do you have any?
It looks like there's one that came in that said, how do you get paid for professional encounters? It's pointless without someone paying for them.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of pharmacies, unfortunately, have had to stop providing some services because there wasn't a way to get paid. So the best way you get paid is you go through the exact same procedure that the other healthcare professionals, such as doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, go through, and you go through and get credentialed with the medical plans. And what credentialing means is you basically are getting a contract with the medical plan. And most pharmacies and pharmacists aren't familiar with that process, so it can be a little bit of a figuring it out. One of the programs that PDS has helps you do that. But if you just follow that same process that the other providers go, medical plans will contract with pharmacists in order to provide these services. And now pharmacists don't have as broad of a scope as doctors, but we still have a scope of practice. And so we can bill for those types of encounters that we can do, no matter where you're at, no matter what state you're in, no matter if you have quote unquote provider status or not, you can get those contracts with the medical plan.
And Lisa, as a follow-up to that, once you get credentialed and want to start billing for some of these services, what kind of technology is needed?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because you do need technology. Medical plans only bill through connected EHR platforms, and so you need to use an EHR platform that's fully certified and HIPAA compliant. That's the only thing that medical plans will connect to. And you could do your own in-house billing, or I highly recommend you use a certified medical biller or a medical billing team that will bill these appropriately for you, at least until you understand the medical billing landscape. Just how pharmacy PBM billing is complicated, and we all know our override codes, by heart by now. We're all newbies at medical billing, and so lean into those experts. But yes, you will need an EHR system, which, if you're not familiar with an EHR system, EHR stands for electronic health record, which is another fancy way of saying online patient charts. So all of your notes for your encounters, just like a doctor, after they see a patient, they might dictate their notes, or they might write up in the chart, and then one of their assistants puts it into the EHR system. You'll be doing those exact same types of things that the MDs and other providers do into that EHR system.
Great, thank you. Looks like a couple have popped up. Can some of this non-PBM revenue include point-of-care testing solutions?
Yes, absolutely. Point-of-care testing has basically 2 models. One is a cash-based model, and depending on your state, sometimes you can do point-of-care testing yourself as a pharmacist. Other states, you're going to have it paired with like a telemedicine visit. But the point-of-care testing, you can just sell them. No insurance is needed at all, so that's definitely out of the reach of the PBM. And there's many testing kits that you can do that with, whether it's HIV, anemia, flu. There's a whole bunch out there. And then if you are credentialed with some of your medical plans will often pay for that testing as well. So you can actually bill for that service. So you can either have an insurance paid model or a cash based model for point of care testing.
Great, thank you. EHR sounds expensive. Do you know of any pharmacies that work with a physician's office?
Yeah, that is one way to do kind of a clinical services and diversify your revenue, is to work with the physician's office. There's been many pharmacies that have been able to do that, and there's been many more pharmacies that haven't been able to do that. They either can't find a doctor that wants to work with them or really understands that model. And so, yes, absolutely, you can work with your doctor's office, use their system, use their medical billing team, and you just get a part of that revenue. Or you can do this all yourself and be able to keep all your own revenue. So it's kind of, and you can do both ways. I know some pharmacies that do it both, so they maximize their relationships with their prescribers, and because they're in the prescriber's office, they can usually perform some higher levels of services. But then there's a whole bucket of services that the pharmacist can perform on their own that they don't want to split the revenue with the physician for. So you can definitely do both models, and both models absolutely improve your diversification of revenue and less reliance on the PBM.
Wonderful, thank you. Next one. Have other pharmacies in New York had luck with billing for professional services this way? New York tends to be behind in adjusting to pharmacy.
Yeah, actually, New York is really great because, again, you're kind of billing. You're not billing as quote unquote the pharmacy or the through the pharmacy benefits. And so New York, kind of to your point, is kind of behind on some of those rules of like audit protection and those kinds of things. But on the flip side, on medical billing, New York's actually pretty good. And the rates are typically higher than the national average. I mean, granted, your costs are probably higher in New York State as well, but typically your reimbursement rates are a little higher than the quote unquote national average. And in states that you have broader scopes of practices like California, Washington, I know there's several other out there, you can actually bill for a lot of those higher level services, whether it's prescribing birth control is usually the most common example, or a statin, something like that. And so, but yes, New York is fantastic for professional services. And generally it's, what is that insurance up there? It's Excel Blue or Excelis, something with like an Excel. And so you can get a lot of patients access by get credentialing in a little less plans. But
okay. Are there any resources for contacting and contracting with medical plans? We've been searching for this and have a hard time locating any resources.
Yeah, it's tough doing it on your own. The program that PDS has put together uses certified credentialists. Just like they're certified medical billers, they're certified credentialists, that's what they do. Navigating the medical billing world and the contracting is tough, and it's especially tough for pharmacies because we're not used to conforming to their rules. So for example, something to give you an example of what I mean by that is when you are quote unquote a provider for most medical plans, your phone system, have you guys ever noticed every time you call your doctor, it says, if this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911? That's not just because every doctor happens to have that same phone system. It's because the medical plans require it. And so if you're applying for credentialing and they get to that point where they call your pharmacy and your phone system doesn't say that, they'll deny you. But you don't really know that's why you were denied. And so when you're working with a team that has experience of credentialing, especially credentialing pharmacists, you'll kind of get through those pitfalls that most pharmacies just aren't prepared for because they just don't have that experience that unfortunately that other medical professionals do.
Okay. What % of claims get paid under service-based practice, and how long does it typically take to receive payment?
Yeah. So one way to think about it when you're asking yourself, like, what can I bill for? It really becomes your time. It's about your time. If you're spending time with your patient, that's going to be a billable encounter. Now, pharmacists don't have a very broad scope, so most of those encounters are going to fall under education and/or consultation. And so you'll get paid for your time that you spend with those patients. So if you do a 10-minute consult, 5 minutes of writing it up, you put it all into a SOAP note, you can bill for a 15-minute encounter of a consultation with that patient. And so you got to start thinking, kind of think outside of the box in terms of like we think about a pharmacist where we get paid, NDC 1 gets paid number 1 and NDC 2 gets paid number 2. When you're thinking about professional encounters, it's really about your time and interaction with your patients. And so the types of encounters are very wide, whether you're consulting on opioid addiction or you're doing a weight loss class or you're giving an immunization and you're pre-checking that patient to make sure they don't have allergies to eggs and all of those kinds of things that you do for immunizations. So the things that you can bill for are really broad. Now, in terms of how long it takes to get paid, when you're an in-network contracted provider, generally it's just a few days because those claims are submitted electronically. You're already contracted with that plan, and it turns around and it gives you your contracted rate. It's usually very quickly. It takes about 90 to 120 days once your applications are in to get to that credentialed and in-network status. And before that, while you're kind of waiting, you can bill as an out-of-network provider, and payments for out-of-network provider services tend to take longer, about 2 to 3 weeks, because they'll be mailing you a check, not direct depositing into your account. And so it takes a little bit longer. But so either way, it's not terribly long. And then once you've gone through that waiting period and have become a credentialed in-network provider, it's usually just a matter of days.
Okay, thank you. How about CPESN? Does this model work? My current dispensing system can send e-care plans to CPESN.
Yeah, so CPESN is a little different, is that they're creating a network and they're trying to contract the entire network with specific plans. And they have done that in some areas. I know in Pennsylvania they have a contract, and I think it's like Idaho, they have some so they're sporadic. I don't know all of the territories. And so the different model that CPESN is doing is they're creating a network and they're collecting a bunch of data to show how valuable that network is and the outcomes that that network is achieving in order to try to get some bigger network-wide contracts. So it's very similar to kind of like a PSAO on the pharmacy side, where if a PSAO signs a contract, everybody who's a member of that PSAO, that contract flows down to all of them. And so that's what CPESN is trying to do, is they're trying to get a contract that anybody in their network will flow down to them. And they are slowly succeeding. And so eventually, as enough work and enough effort goes by and enough time, they will probably have a lot of contracts that when you join in the network, you get these contracts. And so it's really important. I'm a big believer of supporting them and their cause. And in the meantime, that doesn't mean that you can't go out and get your individual contracts with the plans in your area and be billing for services until there's a really proliferated network out there.
Wonderful, thank you. Couple more here, lots of great questions. For professional services, is there a conflict of interest for pharmacies located inside clinics?
Yeah, that's a really common question I get. And the answer is typically no. You obviously want to work with that doctor. I always say, hey, you never want to take services from the doctor, but a lot of the things that the pharmacists are doing are frankly kind of the low end bottom of the totem pole for physicians. Now, if they want to do immunizations, I would let them do the immunizations. I would pick up consulting and I would do education classes. I would do a lot of other things. And it's okay if the patient visits the doctor and they get consulted on their high blood pressure that the doctor just diagnosed them with, and then they come to your pharmacy and they pick up their high blood pressure drugs. You can turn around and give them another consult from that pharmacist point of view. So there's not a whole lot of conflict of interest, but I would definitely talk with that doctor to make sure that you're not taking any services from them. Now, many doctors don't want to do immunizations, even though you're paid well. Flu shots through the medical plans can be anywhere from 80 to 150 or even higher. But they can actually be doing higher end services than that. So they can make $300, $400, $500, for a visit, doing some other things that they might be okay giving up some of that immunization. So it's not really a conflict of interest. It's not like you're fighting for a finite amount with that patient, but you do want to make sure that you work collaboratively with them.
Okay, and kind of to touch base on that one as well. Does the payment received by the pharmacist affect the payment received by the MD? Is our encounter affecting the reimbursement dollars issued to the patient?
It shouldn't affect it. The only model that I would see that something like that might happen is in like an ACO model where a doctor is allocated a flat rate bucket to care for a patient, so if they're giving $5,000 a year to care for a patient, if you take, $200 of that, then that might mean less money for the doctor. But those are kind of different types of payment models there. But in a typical normal sense outside of that model, no, it shouldn't impact it at all. And it actually can have, if it does impact it, it usually improves it, because pharmacists, by performing some of these care plans and doing some of these activities, actually improves the patient's outcome, ticks off some of the boxes that the doctor is required to do to management of those patients, and can actually improve their metrics, which actually can improve reimbursement for physicians.
Okay, wonderful. Does PDS guide pharmacists on what services are paid in each state and which services are most profitable?
Yeah, so I mean, what we do is we kind of help you to understand your legal scope, and usually recommend, if you want to broaden that scope, how you can best do that. Each state is a little different. In Alabama, they don't have collaborative practice, but they have physician oversight, their protocols. In Florida, you can't do a flu shot without a protocol, but in California, you can. So it certainly varies from state to state. And so our team will help you decide on that. It's also, you could also go to your state association and some of your own state things to really understand that scope of practice. But yeah, that's all part of trying to understand what to bill for. And the one thing that I always want to tell you is, no matter if you're quote unquote a provider in your state, that doesn't impact your scope of service. And so what we're talking about here is your scope of practice. The things that you are legally allowed to do when you're spending time with your patients are things that you can bill for, regardless if you have quote unquote provider status. Now, it's funny, in some states where pharmacists don't have provider status, they actually have broader scopes of practice than in other states where they quote unquote do have provider status. So provider status isn't necessarily the be all of end all of everything. You really want to be focusing on your scope of practice. What can you do? Can you prescribe, Narcan for somebody on an opioid? Or can you do a consultation? Of course you can. Can you do an immunization? Well, maybe in your state you can do it all by yourself, and then maybe in your state you need a protocol. And so those are the types of things you want to be looking at.
What is the current success rate of the pharmacies trying to establish service-based pharmacy?
Yeah, so most pharmacies will end up getting approved. It's funny, I was talking to a credentialer just last week, and it's like, hey, if you wait long enough, they're going to approve you. It's just a matter of, sometimes it's taking a while, but generally most pharmacists are approved within 90 to 120 days. Medicare tends to be a lot quicker than that. But your commercial plans typically are that mark. And actually, one of the silver linings of the COVID pandemic is that insurances have been approving new providers faster. There's been an influx need of providers in areas, and so we've actually seen some of those waiting times go down a little bit. But it's just a matter of following their procedure, and sometimes the plan will ask for silly things, like for contracts to be signed in blue ink, and if you don't sign it in blue ink, they won't accept it. And then the other things are bigger requirements of maybe how your phone system is answered. And so it's just, if you work through the process, and if you do everything that plan looks, you will get accepted.
Okay, thank you. Any other specific cash-based revenue opportunities that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's a couple that I just love. So I think weight loss is a great area, and there's a lot of ways to do weight loss. There's just selling products, there's doing kind of coaching. There's a great program out there. Some of you probably know about this, but Optavia is a great program. It's a structure that creates revenue for you that is based off like products and their fuelings, but it's a great structure for consulting and really elevating your clinical status with those patients that you're interacting with. But there's many others out there as well. So weight loss is a big niche, whether you're compounding, retail, any of those types of things. I just really love weight loss as a cash niche. And then another great niche is actually pharmacogenetic testing. There's some great companies out there that you get certified as, you go through their CE program, you get certified, and you end up getting paid $90 for each interpretation test that you do. And so those are some kind of clinic-based cash revenue streams. And then of course there's, I mean, CBD has been life-changing for many pharmacies in terms of revenue outside of the PBMs, but just other OTC products. Make sure you're carrying products that your patients want, whether they're kind of health related or not. Even just increasing your OTC revenues by 1,000 or 2,000 each and every month actually adds up a lot to the bottom line at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. What is CPESN doing above and beyond what we're getting from doing MTMs through Marixa or Outcomes?
I know, well, I'm not from CPESN, so I'm on the outside looking in. I talk to many CPESN luminaries very frequently, but I know that they help you create care plans, and I know they help you to understand how to perform those duties. So they do a lot of training, and they're collecting all of the data that shows how pharmacist intervention helps reduce the overall health cost of the plan, which is kind of their justification for asking for those networks and to be contracted as a network, is because when you engage with the pharmacist, the patient outcomes improve, which ultimately reduces the cost for that health plan.
Okay, thank you. Outside of individual credentialing, does PDS offer a turnkey program for the service-based pharmacy, or are there outside efforts required?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Certainly credentialing is just like the first part. That's just what you only do it once, and you kind of get past that. PDS has created many programs to support our members that are going through service-based pharmacy, because really so much about your business can change. It kind of depends how big you want to make it, but I often say it's kind of like starting a new business within a business. And so how you market, your marketing could completely change, because on your retail side, your pharmacy side, you can't just fill a drug because a patient comes in and they qualify for it. You got to have the prescription order. They got to see their physician first. Whereas now, if you're performing professional encounters in your pharmacy, the way you can direct to consumer market for those services changes completely. And so there's lots of little things that'll be changing. This is really allowing pharmacists to work at the top of their license. And so you need the rest of your staff to work at the top of their license as well. And so there's a lot of training, workflow, lots of different kinds of things that are going to be supported in helping pharmacies really implement this into their pharmacies.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like we have one more in the queue. Is the pharmacist or the pharmacy credentialed? And if the pharmacist, how is payment received? In whose name?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So this, our program, I can't speak for other types of programs, but our program gets the pharmacist credentialed with the plan. So that pharmacist has to submit, their resume, their diploma, their all of their licenses and certifications and all those kinds of things. But the owner of the pharmacy owns that credentialing. So payment is paid to whatever entity is, kind of sponsoring that credentialing. So payment will come to the pharmacy, just like your, PBMs. Your pharmacist might be checking the prescriptions, but the payment is coming to you as the pharmacy. Same thing for the professional services, is the pharmacist is performing the professional service, but the payment is coming to the pharmacy.
Okay, thank you. I think that wraps up everything in the queue. That was some great Q&A, really engaging. Thank you, Lisa, so much for sharing your expertise today. We sincerely appreciate your support of AAP and independent community pharmacy. And again, thank you to ScriptPro for their generous financial contribution to today's CE.